All right, so when we left off, I had done a speed painting, but if I go back in my history, I'll show you that the speed painting looked like that, right? And that was me just sketching what I saw. And I can see where I got those decisions. But the problem is with human faces in particular, all these little measurements, like the top of the head, the space between the eyes and the nose, the space of the mouth. Notice he has a lot more space underneath his nose and not very much space between his eyes and the bottom of his nose. And so all those little measurements are a little bit off because I didn't measure them. I didn't do a diagram sketch. I didn't do a facial template. I just painted. But with digital, what's beautiful is I could take a selection from here and move it over and then take its opacity down. And then I could take my sketch layer, right? I'll do that again, just so you can see. So this is my painting, and I can transform it. Command T, right click, warp, and then I can push my eyes up to match the proportions. And then because I've been sketching for a long time, like the other things kind of go with it, right? It's like having it be on like a stretchy latex mask that now we can wrap around the actual photo. Doesn't mean everything's going to be right. And we don't want everything to be exactly like the photo. We're not just machines reproducing the photo. And this is very different than just painting on top of the photo, right? So now if I turn that off, you'll see that the proportions are different. And they're going to get me a little bit closer in my next sketch. Now, painting on top of the photo, or in this case, underneath it, if I lock this, right, would be to steal colors. And then to like say, okay, I want his shoulders to go up and out like that, like they do in the photo. But that's not always the best decision for your painting. I don't particularly like how that looks, right? But I can maybe reference that a little bit, just with some angles. And then I can steal colors and I can, round out the jaw there. Make sure the hair gets over here as it does in the photo. But when you paint on top of the photo, that is called rotoscoping. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's an old special effects technique. It's what they used to make the lightsabers light up in the original Star Wars trilogy. They just painted right over the film. But if you rely on just that approach, you just end up with something that doesn't look very much like it's from your own hand, right? It looks to me like one of those portraits that a photo booth at Chuck E. Cheese draws for you. Right? And same thing if you use kind of like the photo painting filters on your photos to kind of turn them into a digital painting. They will turn them into pixels, and colors and edges, but they won't look like they're made by any particular intentioned artist. All right. So now that I've got my base 100% color, right? Now I get to start at a lower opacity brush with a new layer. I'm going to keep this up, and this is at like 50% opacity. But now I'm going to make a new layer on top of my speed sketch layer. I'm going to go ahead and lock my speed sketch layer. The biggest problem with digital painting is you sometimes are painting on a layer you don't understand. So I lock my layers as I go. And I actually don't try to make all that many layers in these early phases. So I'm going to call this my refined paint layer. And refined only in the sense that I'm going to try to get shapes and colors and build them up even more, right? And to do that, I'm going to take my brush, same brush, but I'm going to take it at an opacity of about 60. And I could even play with the flow a little bit and take the flow a little bit down. And that way, it's going to layer on top of itself. You see? In a way that's a little bit more like watercolor, and it will build colors in a more interesting way. Remember, you can do Option-Command-Z to go back several steps. So now I'm still going to steal from here, but now when I paint in, you see it adapts the colors underneath. And I'm going to throw some crazy colors into there. And I'm going to be changing colors a lot. Because now every time I overlap, I'm creating a new palette that I can steal from. So like shadows between these reds. And if you take a painting class, like one of the lessons they'll usually teach you is never to use black, right? You want to mix your shadows. You often use something like alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue, and you mix those for a black to get started with. So same thing here. You can kind of mix your skin tones or your flesh or your fur colors, whatever it is, out of a lot of these different tones. And I'm still using a pretty big brush. I'm just not using it at full opacity anymore. And you can see how we're starting to get to, let's see. Oh, it's none of these. We're starting to get to some of these approaches, right? And I can even steal colors right from there. Anything right from Photoshop I can steal. And you see how there's greens in there and whites in there. And even though this is an analog painting, not a digital painting, all the same rules of color theory and eye movement and engagement, they all apply. And even though it looks like black, it's not black. Look at the big smile. It's okay to go outside of the edges. This is not digital coloring. We are not painting underneath outlines. You want freedom. And you want some unusual color every once in a while. It's very easy to desaturate colors, to take their intensity down. And so I feel like it's safer to start with pretty intense colors. And then, dull them as you work or as you refine it, rather than trying to get the really kind of true life colors down first. Because as you mix and layer, the colors tend to dull themselves a little bit. I haven't started to incorporate the socks yet. I have to figure out how I'm going to do that. I'm not crazy about his having glasses, because that's not something you can have that much fun with. But he does have his glasses in every picture, so I think it's not something that's optional when it comes to Desmond Tutu. Now you just paint. You can be kind of mindless about it, and you'll notice how much those layers matter, right? And then if I take off my speed sketch layer, you see that this has a very different quality to it, just because it's a lower opacity brush. Everything else is the same, except the brush is at 60%, the flow is at 73%, versus this. And then what if I unlock my speed sketch layer and then start to take the opacity down? That might be interesting. And that helps me to have to be even bolder now with some of my options. Okay, so I go back to my refined paint layer, and the goal is, this is our goal today, to get rid of all the white, to just cover it all up. Just paint the guy. Keep it going. And try to always know what layer you're on. He has these beautiful blue eyes, so I'm going to have to definitely put those in. Grayish blue. And you want to establish a darkest dark pretty early. It does not mean it needs to be black. And then for something as important as where the eyes sit, that could be something you use your map for a little bit. Not that they have to match exactly. You kind of check your proportions. And remember, we have multiple references. That can help too. So if I want to get like more of his eyelid, I might use this reference, or a better take on his nose. And I'm using option a lot. Stealing colors directly. Notice the colors I steal from the paintings are a lot more interesting than the colors I steal from photos. Photos are color challenged compared to painting. And then be willing to try some unusual colors too, especially when it goes into darks. And so if your subject has glasses or has facial hair, I recommend trying to paint them pretty fully without it first. And then you're just going to set it on top on another layer later. Because the glasses and the facial hair, they're not as important as the kind of skeletal structure underneath. Don't forget the highlights. Don't let everything kind of go towards a bland middle. That can happen pretty easily. I like the yellow light in this one. So again, it's helpful to have multiple references. And then the biggest problem with digital painting, even if you're speed painting and you're trying to keep energy everywhere, is we obviously are just humans that are interested in some things more than other things. So we tend to like work more on things like the eyes and the nose and the mouth. And we ignore things like the ears or the hairline. And so that's why I like to keep my speed painting layer separate from my refined paint layer. And I kind of see, okay, I've been ignoring a lot, you know, like the chin and the shadow under the chin. Let's put that in. Let's have some fun with it. You can see how much my inspirations affect my color choices, because that's my palette. And it's so much faster than going to the color options, you know, and selecting each color that way, or even using swatches or other digital tools.